Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 331 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where we're going to abandon Frodo and the hobbits to torment and death. Or at least a rainy, lonely road to the Shire while we're off doing something else.
Yeah. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm James, the Sage of the South, and I'm here with the Man of the West, who would pull a Gandalf if he could, Alan Sisto.
Head off into the woods for a long chat with Tom? Yeah, actually, it's not such a bad idea, but, I think the meter would get to me eventually, so I'll skip that. Folks, join us as we welcome a few of our patrons, our very patient patrons, I might add. They've been waiting for a little while today for our 27th quarterly Questions After Nightfall.
No matter how you got here or how long it took you to get here, you're all welcome here in the common room here at the Prancing Pony Podcast. We're reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation and, as you can tell, bad jokes along the way.
What do you mean bad jokes, James? What are you talking about?
There are no bad jokes or good jokes, just jokes? Is that
just
what you're
jokes,
suggesting?
that's right.
Yeah.
It's like pizza. Even bad pizza is still pizza. We love deep dives into the lore, discussing our favorite themes, and a whole lot more. But once a quarter, we take a break from our read-through of the book and welcome a few of our patrons to join us here in the common room to bring along some of their very best questions for us.
We have no idea what they're going to ask us, so as we've done so many times before, we're simply going to do the best job we can in answering their questions with whatever we have on our shelves.
And in between our ears. As with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, not that that's... Our shelves are definitely more full than our brains. Yeah, let's be really clear about that. Aside from any possible edits for nervous coughs and time spent flipping through pages as we look panicked for an answer, we will be presenting this as it was recorded live. Everything, with one exception, that you hear in this show will have been recorded during this session. We did have a guest who was unable to maintain the connection that was needed to do the recording, so he's going to send in audio of his questions separately. But other than that, everything you hear was recorded live today.
If you'd like to be on one of these with us sometime, join the Fellowship of the Podcast at patreon.com/prancingponypod. Questions After Nightfall episodes are recorded once a quarter, and patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher are invited to join.
It's just one of the ways that we try to show our appreciation to those who support the show, giving them the opportunity to join us, make us laugh, make us think, occasionally embarrass us, in the best possible way, of course. So let's go ahead and get started. James, who is up first today?
So first we'll do Graham with his pre-recorded question, the one we're not doing live.
Yeah, the one where we had technical issues.
We're answering live, so yeah.
That's right.
Hi, my name is Graham. I'm in Vancouver, BC. I've been part of the podcast for well over 5 years, but this is the first Questions After Nightfall I've done for like 4.5 years. I think it was back in Questions After Nightfall 9, my last one, partly due to some recurring tech problems. Anyway, my question is, I'm not talking about the lore so much here, but the general popular view towards Tolkien and his works. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have in society, whether it be about Middle-earth or the characters or some of Tolkien's themes or the way he handles good and evil and things like that? I wonder what you think, maybe because of the movies or just because of the way pop culture works, but what do you think are some of the false ideas people have that are out there? Thanks.
James, let's talk about that. What are some of the big misconceptions? And then how do we maybe, a second part that he didn't ask, how do we overcome that? How do we fix that?
Well, the one that comes to mind immediately for me is taking Tolkien's comments about wanting to develop a mythology for England and assume that that's true of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, the other minds and hands comment.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, he says he set out to develop this sequence of myths and so on. But then he says quite clearly in Letter 131 that he gave up that idea.
My crest has since fallen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think we make a mistake to assume that what he was intending to do in Lord of the Rings in particular was to build that mythology for England. That was an idea that may have motivated him early on with the Book of Lost Tales and so on. He'd moved on from that point. And that's actually, to be honest, it's a misunderstanding that you even hear Sir Peter Jackson make. In interviews, he said, Lord of the Rings is a mythology for England. And I think that leads to a lot of dangerous assumptions about what Lord of the Rings is really about.
That's a fair point, because it does lead to some sort of like, not allegories, but some very strong analogies that Tolkien certainly would not have intended for us to read into it.
Right.
As far as England is concerned. Of course, at the same time, and what makes it such an easy misconception to fall into is because Tolkien did say things like, oh, the Shire is modeled after a, turn of the century, Warwickshire village around the time of the Diamond Jubilee. Okay, so that is England, but it isn't England, and it's not the same thing.
It's not the connection to England. It's specifically that idea that it was intended to be a mythology for England.
Right. Because that's very much, like you said, Book of Lost Tales, the early Silmarillion, all of that stuff. That's a good one. I think that's definitely a very big misconception. Like you said, one that's shared even by people who are sort of giants in the Tolkien community, like Sir Peter Jackson. I did like the examples that Graham gave, the idea that maybe Middle-earth isn't our Earth. That's certainly one. Tolkien has made it very clear that it is. There are a lot of misconceptions. The idea that, it's a simplistic story of good versus evil and everything is black and white and there are no shades of gray. I don't know how you read the story even once and not notice that.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's one of those misconceptions where you wonder if people have actually paid attention at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one that just doesn't even survive first reading. Tom makes a point, by the way, in chat, folks. He says, a mythology for England and a mythology that could be dedicated to my country to England are not the same thing. And that is true, Tom.
That's a really helpful distinction.
That it really is. And really, I guess we should apologize for not making that clearer. But the point is, though, that even at the time that he was writing it, he was talking about those early works. He was talking about the early, what did you say, James? Like some of the Book of Lost Tales stuff, the sort of what ends up being the frame narrative for how we get that information.
Exactly. Yes.
Oh goodness, so many other misconceptions. The simplistic view. There are some things that I think are easy to say that are misconceptions that maybe aren't. What do you think are some of those?
That leads me on to something. I don't think it directly is the same thing that Graham was asking, but I'll bring it up anyway. And it's another pet peeve of mine, sort of, is people quoting characters in the books and attributing those quotes to Tolkien himself, as if the statements of characters in a book necessarily always reflect the opinion of the author. So you'll get some quote from Gandalf attributed to Tolkien, or some. If you're going to do that, why not take some quote from the mouth of Sauron or from Saruman, and attribute it to
that
to
every
Tolkien.
Quote that a character speaks is
So I mean, just to tie that into Graham's question, I think the misconception is thinking that it's necessarily a comment that Tolkien is wanting to make instead of what he's conceiving a character would come up with.
That's true. I mean, when Tolkien wants to say something, it's not as though he shied away from that. He makes his own opinions very clear. I think the other misconception is that if Tolkien has said something in his letters, it is 100% absolutely categorically true and cannot possibly mean anything other than what he said. Because as we know, it is all about who he's writing to in his letters. There are a lot of times where he says one thing to one person and something almost but not quite contradictory to somebody else that throws a lot more light on nuance of it. So
yeah, I mean, one of my favorites of those is how in the application letter for the Rawlinson Bosworth professorship, he'll talk about how Lit and Lang, can never be separated, and they're both wonderful. Yeah. And then in private letters, he's like, "I couldn't stand the Lit stuff. I'm a
nothing
Lang
later than 18th century." Yeah, exactly. That is an interesting question because I think we could probably go an entire episode on all the misconceptions about Tolkien. I mean, we could do a Patreon special for an hour just on that. Yeah. There are so many.
Yep.
How do we, as content creators and sort of, active educators in a way, well, especially you actually do teach. I just sort of jabber on. But how do we, as people in the Tolkien community, influence Tolkien fans, Tolkien readers to sort of overcome some of these misconceptions?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where we just keep teaching the truth, I guess. I don't know that we necessarily should spend a ton of time addressing I don't know. I don't know how much time we should spend addressing the misconceptions, but I think it's helpful to focus on the true stuff. One interesting thing I've observed, though, is people are really shocked at some of the stuff that I've done if I point out contradictions or things that Tolkien gets wrong himself. People really don't like that. The suggestion that Tolkien sometimes made mistakes, sometimes contradicted himself.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's okay.
Yeah. Considering what a humongous universe he created, the fact that there are so few of those contradictions is actually pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they're minor things. The one that comes to mind, which I did a video about, was the sort of disappearance of Merry in the first chapter of Lord of the Rings, where Carl Hofstadter and I had a conversation about this, how if you look at the drafts of the chapter, you can see how it happened. That basically Merry's role in the first chapter of Lord of the Rings was actually a dwarf in the first drafts. Yeah. And as that got changed, things kind of got messed around. And so you get a situation where Merry's there and then all of a sudden he isn't. Gandalf shows up. He has the secret conversation with Frodo about the ring and everything. And Merry's just nowhere to be seen, even though we're never told that Merry left.
Right.
Tolkien just forgot to say what happened to Merry. Yeah, it's no big deal.
Exactly.
People get really upset if you suggest that.
Well, that was certainly a fun one to think through, James. Really an interesting question, Graham, so thank you for that. James, do you know who is next on our list?
Up next, we have Sam.
Sam, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Sam from Pittsburgh.
I'll forgive the Pittsburgh part.
I expected some NFL, American football jiving from a Raiders fan
against
the Steelers
fan.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys do well in the draft. I have no ill will towards the Raiders.
Same. You're not the Chiefs or the Chargers, so I actually there's no hatred there.
There you go. So I recently just got caught up fully to real-time release episodes. So I have a question that bridges...
Congratulations, and I'm sorry, because now you have to wait a week. Yeah.
It took me a while, but I love doing it. So I have a question that spans sort of the creation of the Rings of Power in the Silmarillion to where we're heading to in Return of the King.
Oh, wow.
And so my question is, with the Elven Rings of Power, you have Vilya and Nenya, Elrond and Galadriel's rings, and their primary power seems to be the preservation for that bearer's realm. But Narya, Gandalf's ring, is not used similarly at all. So my question is Narya's primary purpose just totally different than the other two rings, and it is purely to inspire people, or does it still have a preservation effect? But since Círdan held it for so long in the Grey Havens, did the Grey Havens benefit from that preservation power and it lingers there? Or does it follow Gandalf as he travels, which I think you guys would all agree that it doesn't, because everything changes wherever Gandalf goes.
Exactly. It's a very different function as used by Gandalf. I'll start, and then James, I know you've got so much knowledge on this. I can't wait to just let you loose. I think one of the things that James will get to that I just want to start by saying is that we really learned that the rings, especially Narya in particular, just because of the way it's the way Gandalf uses it, enhances what already exists in the bearer. So that's why, for example, the rings that the dwarves get, which are identical mechanically to the 9 rings given to men, they are only able to enhance their greed. They don't turn them into wraiths because that's just not dwarven nature, but they do enhance the character traits, so the greediness and the desire for gold. With Gandalf, Narya enhances his job and his trait, his characteristics, his personality of going around and encouraging and trying to get these people to do their job. Preservation, though, that is a very good question. And James, I'm curious to see where you're going to go with this. I think it certainly had that function when Gil-galad gave it to Círdan, and Círdan used it there at the Grey Havens. But a lingering is something I'd never thought about before. What do you think?
Okay, gosh. So a few things to say. One, about the kindling nature of it, the enhancing nature. So I think it's clear all the rings of power have some amplification purpose. And as Alan said, you see that in the effect on the dwarves and so on. So the 16 that were ultimately given to men and dwarves have that amplification effect. And I think the 3 elven rings have that too. In terms of the preservation effect, it's an interesting question how much of that's actually just that amplification. Yeah. Is it actually the preserving nature of elves in general that's been amplified by those 3 rings? I think it's pretty clear that all 3 of the elven rings do have that preserving effect.
That was their intention.
Yeah, and it's always talked about the 3 having that preservation quality.
Yeah.
I want to come back to what you said, Alan, in terms of the sort of amplification of Gandalf's nature already being about the kindling. This is something that we cover in a mailbag, which is that there's a lot of description of Gandalf independent of the ring, being somebody that has an inner warmth and he delights in fire and all this sort of stuff. So the fact, it's interesting, when we speculate on this, that Círdan, when he saw Gandalf arrive, and we're told that Círdan could see deeper than anyone else in Middle-earth. Círdan, I think, got a sense that Gandalf had that warm nature to him, that he had that kindling ability. And so, hey, the Ring of Fire was the perfect thing to give him to amplify that. And so in terms of that role of Narya, I think it was very much just amplifying Gandalf's natural inclination to kindle hope and so on, because that discussion of kindling is used both in terms of Gandalf and the ring. Mm-hmm. In terms of the preservation, though, okay, so I think it had a preserving quality. I'm trying to think if we see any sign of that when Gandalf wielded it. Well, one question I have, I guess, is, and we didn't really discuss this, Alan, in the mailbag, how much of that depends on them actually wearing it? That's
a very good question.
Because one thing that I didn't realize until doing the research for the mailbag was just how secret they were about those rings. And when you listen to the mailbag answers,
super duper top secret, yeah.
It is the most secret thing in all
It's
of Middle-earth.
More secret than Aragorn's identity, the location of Rivendell. It's more secret than everything.
That's all like, frontline newspaper coverage. One of the things we talk about, and by the way, now I'm firmly now of the opinion, I was on the fence when we recorded the episode, I'm now firmly of the opinion Aragorn did not know about that Galadriel had the ring.
No.
Some of you may recall when Frodo lets it slip that Galadriel is wearing one of the three rings. Aragorn says, don't say that to anyone, not even me.
Not even to me. That should not have been spoken outside Lorien.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty clear from particularly stuff in Unfinished Tales that no one knew. It explicitly says the only people that knew who had the three rings were the three that held them, plus Círdan, obviously, Gil-galad before he died. And obviously, right at the very end, when we finally find out that Gandalf... That's the other thing that's fun. We all sort of know who had the three rings. Readers of Lord of the Rings, the first time round, no idea.
They certainly had no idea about Gandalf. I mean, obviously, Galadriel was a big reveal.
Galadriel's a big reveal at the time, at the Mirror of Galadriel.
But that's the only one. We have no idea about Elrond.
You only find that out on the second last page of the book, right? It's all of a sudden revealed, hey, plot twist.
But wearing it wouldn't break that secret. I mean, because remember, Galadriel was wearing it and Sam doesn't see it.
That's true.
It's certainly very possible that Gandalf and Elrond are constantly wielding their rings, but not being seen.
It does say in the Grey Havens chapter that Gandalf was basically wielding it in public now, right? Does that just mean that it was visible and he was always wearing it?
Because at that point, it's just a shiny bauble.
Exactly.
It's no longer a magic ring. It no longer has the power that it had, including the power to disguise itself, to not be seen if the bearer doesn't wish it to be seen.
Although, wouldn't Frodo have seen it then?
Oh, that's a good question. Ooh.
If Frodo only ever sees Galadriel's and not Elrond's or Gandalf's, then presumably Elrond and Gandalf aren't wearing theirs all the time.
You're 100% right. You would have seen Elrond's too at the council if indeed he'd been wielding it. But then the question comes back to, does wielding it change the power, or does wielding it... Because we talk about preservation and coming back to that theme.
Yep.
Gandalf's task as an Istar, to do what he needed to do in terms of uniting the Free Peoples against Sauron, the same job that the other Istari had. He's the only one, as Tolkien says, who succeeded in his quest, who actually did his job, right? Radagast gets distracted by the deer and the trees and whatever. He's just, I don't know, having mushrooms or whatever. Saruman, on the other hand, distracted by power and greed and, wanting to be like Sauron. Who knows what happened with the Blues? But Gandalf's the only one who did his job. Is it possible that the ring's preservation power helped him to preserve his task, to help him to stay on task and to give him the endurance?
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
That would seem like the kind of
Well, because we know the preserving power of the rings does include the preserving of the person themselves, right? That's the whole point of the long life that it gave Bilbo and Gollum and so on. So, yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, because it doesn't seem like Gandalf carries around any sort of preservation with him, right? I mean, other than the healing powers that he has, because, he does take a significant role in healing certain individuals throughout, at various moments. And it certainly seems magical.
Blessing the beer.
Yeah, blessing the beer. I love that. Yeah. Beer of surpassing excellence +1. I like this. This is an interesting discussion. I mean, I don't know that we have a concrete answer. Let's just be honest. But I tend to land on the ring having preservation power, probably not at lingering. I don't think the Grey Havens are preserved because the ring was once there, because it's been 2,000 years since it's been there. So I don't think that's in play. But I do think that its preserving power helped indeed sustain Gandalf. as Círdan seemed to say. In his words, when he gives the ring to Gandalf, he's like, this is going to help you accomplish your job.
Right. And also, he specifically also mentions, remember, the weariness, it helping with the weariness you've taken upon yourself.
Yeah, that's true. Which I know when we talked about that, we were thinking about that in the context of Gandalf becoming incarnate, right? And so obviously subjecting himself to things like hunger and thirst and fatigue. And that's true. But I think Círdan's comment is multi-layered.
Well, also remember Gandalf says when he's leaving, this is relevant to the episodes that we've just been recording, that when Gandalf leaves them, he says that the burden's gone from him now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no longer his responsibility. Middle Earth, not my circus, not my monkeys. Yeah.
So if that's related to the weariness that's talked about right at the start, then having a way of preserving would be helpful. It's part of that, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I do think the ring has some preservation power. It's just we see it in a different way than the static rings that Elrond and Galadriel wield. Yeah. Wow. Good question, though. Really good question. All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back for a lot more questions from our listeners. Now, soon we'll get back to our listener questions, but before we do, we want to remind you there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast than just me and James, thankfully.
Indeed. The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions, as you're hearing, and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
So on Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony podcast, follow the page to get the news and the episode drops, but you're going to want to join the group for some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply at Prancing Pony Pod.
And if you want daily Tolkien content, please be sure to check out Today's Tolkien Times on YouTube and all your favorite podcast apps. It's my short format daily show, and I say short format, it's still 8 to 10 minutes long, with everything from Mailbag Monday to Silmarillion Saturday. Be sure to check it out at youtube.com/@TolkienTimes and follow @TolkienTimes on all your social media. But now it's time to head back to the common room for some more questions. James, who's up next?
Next up, we have the ever insightful Tom Hillman.
Ah, yes. The author of Power, Pity, and Frodo's Ring. Fantastic book.
Okay, so before somebody asks me this, since I mentioned that Tom's question should be in trochaic tetrameter, I've worked out the beginning of my question in trochaic tetrameter.
Because of course you have, Tom.
Because of course I have. Elves are known for singing songs that can be heard and understood by people who don't know their language. Hearing it and understanding even as the words are spoken. I've been reading the Kalevala a lot this week.
I love it.
So anyway, the part in Three's Company where the hobbits run into the elves.
Oh, okay. Oh, you meant Three is Company. You said Three's Company, so I was waiting for a Roper or a Suzanne Summers joke or something. But anyway, Three is Company. Okay.
Three is Company, Alan.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, they run into Gildor, played by Norman Fell, and
I would pay money for a Norman Fell portrayal of Gildor and Glorian.
Yes, and the hobbits hear them singing in Elvish, and it says that it was singing in the fair elven tongue of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the sound blending with the melody seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. This was the song as Frodo heard it. So you get this idea that elven songs are like self-executable, that they automatically translate themselves into the language and the meter of anybody who's listening. So why don't they do it in Lothlorien? When they hear the elves singing songs lamenting Gandalf, they can't understand them. And Legolas won't translate them. When Galadriel sings I Sang of Leaves, that comes through straight. There's no Elvish there. So is that one translated or not? But when you get to Numarie, you only get a translation in prose. Mm-hmm. And the way it's described is as if Frodo had to sit down with a dictionary later and work it out.
Mm.
Yep. So it's like, Why does this not happen in Lothlorien?
You always ask the hard questions, Tom.
I've got some thoughts. I do want to make a point about the Sindarin versus Quenya difference in the translation of that, because I think it's really significant what Tolkien does there. The fact that he does give it's interesting how often in Lord of the Rings, Sindarin is not translated, but Quenya is. I mean, Quenya is always given as this very deliberate, as you say, Tom, you can imagine Frodo having to sit down afterwards and add in the translation. And I think that says a lot about the sort of difference that Tolkien was setting up in terms of one as kind of not a lingua franca, but the sort of language of communication, at least among the elves and the Gondorians on the one hand, in the case of Sindarin, as opposed to Quenya. That, Quenya is something that has to be much more explicitly translated. It can't be assumed that anyone reading the Red Book, for example, would know the Quenya.
Thingol did a pretty good job of shutting down Quenya, and that affected the rest of Middle-earth for, millennia.
Yeah. It's something that I think they did a good job of in Rings of Power, and it was something I didn't catch on at first until I had a secret conversation with some of the people involved with the language work there. The reason that in Rings of Power you get no Sindarin, but you get Quenya all the time, is because what we're hearing in English is probably Sindarin, right? So
that's fair.
Much like Westron is English in Lord of the Rings, in the Second Age, in much of what we see in the Rings of Power, Sindarin is the common speech. So I think we see that in the whole way that Tolkien deals with translation within the text, that he treats Sindarin very differently than Quenya in that regard. But coming back to the sort of first part of Tom's question, and I'm interested obviously in your thoughts on this too, Alan, I wonder if it's the nature of what's being said, that the mourning for Gandalf is much more personal. It's not lighthearted, and in a way there's this sort of much more openness that the elves may have had about people understanding what they were singing about in the Woody End compared to what they're singing about in Lothlorien.
But that doesn't answer the question about the Quenya that Galadriel sings at the end. I mean, is she trying to be secretive about it? If Gildor and his elves are being open about what they're singing, and so therefore it's sort of auto-translated. And in my mind, I'm almost thinking like a little Osanwe, like planting, because everybody's default is open, right? Yep. You can shut yourself off to it, but you're open to it. So Gildor is sort of, beaming the translation, beaming the meaning of the words into, in this case, Frodo, right? Because here's the other thing. This was the song as Frodo heard it. So everybody's going to hear it maybe slightly differently here or there, little tweaks, little changes. But yeah, maybe how does that address how it doesn't get auto-translated in Lorien?
In the Namarie.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, just the fact, though, that it stuck with him for so long, I think is indicative of something. Don't you?
Yeah. I don't know what Galadriel's purpose was. I mean, one of the reasons why it may be so painstakingly translated into prose afterwards is not that he couldn't understand it the first time round.
No.
But that he wanted to sort of get it right.
Yeah.
Because you get the impression that when it is when it is beamed into people's minds, they're getting the gist of it, right? They're not necessarily getting
the words.
Maybe Frodo wanted to go back
and be precise.
Yeah. For the purposes of the record.
Man, Tom, you ask the questions that just can't be answered. I mean, it does give us an excuse to look at some Quenya. Ai laurielantarlassi sornen, jeni junottimi verirammar aldoron, jeni velinte juldar avanjer, miromardi lissemir vorva, andune pella, vardu tellumar, nuluini jassen tintilari eleni or Mario aretari lirnen. I know that probably because I'm finally with a genuine linguistic expert, the entire time I'm stumbling, going, "Oh no, James is going to catch my errors."
It was wonderful.
But it's so fun to pronounce. It's such a beautiful, it's so aesthetically pleasing that I just any excuse I have. Yeah.
The thing I was thinking about today, I mean, I now have, thanks to James talking about Sindarin being what we're actually hearing when we're hearing English in the Rings of Power, that makes me think of everyone speaking in a foreign language, whether it's Latin or German or something else like that, in movies in English, has a British accent.
Yeah, you're
unless
right.
they're French. For some reason, the French are different. My thought was I was thinking today, could this possibly have something to do with the fact that Lothlorien is fading, that the power of Elvish song is kind of starting to lose its potency? I also wonder sometimes, does the singer have to mean you to understand?
Yeah. Is it an intent of the artist?
Or is it just, if you're fluent in a language and you're speaking one language and walking down the street and somebody walks down the street and says something in another language that you're fluent in, you just understand it as they go by. You don't think about it, or is it like that? They just speak and you understand. Like Pippin and Sauron, he just looked and I understood. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I was wondering is this because that Frodo's coming is as the footsteps of doom and that Lothlorien will not see another spring? Just a thought. I don't know that I could ever prove that or come close.
I would probably lean towards that if this were something she sang after the One Ring was destroyed, and we know that the fading is, imminent and not just like a thing that's coming.
Well, as Treebeard says, they are getting a bit behind the times in there.
Yeah,
So
that is true. Well, James, I don't know about you. That was an incredible question. It's just not one that we have an answer for. But it really does make you think, and I really do enjoy the idea. I think I did like hearing what you said about Rings of Power. I think you're absolutely right. There's a reason why we hear Quenya as Quenya, but we never hear Sindarin spoken.
I didn't know the answer to that myself. So to be clear, what happened was I was ranting on social media that we're not hearing enough Sindarin. We're hearing only Quenya.
Yeah.
And I got a DM from a certain person who I won't mention because it's confidential, who sort of said, I wonder why that could be. Have you considered this? And I thought, oh my goodness, that you're right. The reason that we don't hear the Sindarin is because it's translated into English. That's what they're speaking all the time.
Absolutely. Of course they are.
Yeah. And it's that whole thing Tolkien does, right? The reason that he is happy for Westron to be translated to English and the language of Rohan to be translated to Old English, but keeps the Elvish and Dwarvish untranslated, because he wants us to experience as readers what it would have been like for the hobbits.
Right, exactly. And also because he didn't want to have to constantly refer to Mara Limbingi Ringbearer. I'm so glad he translated those names. All right, James, who is up next?
Okay, next up we have Meta.
Meta, welcome.
All right, hi. Yeah, this is Meta from Copenhagen.
Welcome back. Good to have you again.
Thank you. Since Tom did his poem, I've been working on a limerick.
Uh-oh. This is a family-friendly show, Meta.
Yes, it'll be family-friendly, and it'll only cover the beginning of the question.
That's pretty impressive if you did that like in the last 10 minutes since Tom asked his question in poem.
So probably the quality will be from that.
Okay.
But here goes. There once was a place called the Shire, whose hobbits were not in a dire situation, for there were rangers with care. They only knew when the ring went in the fire.
I love the enchantment.
That's great. I love it. Well done.
So that's not really the question, but
okay.
But that's kind of the setup. So in a recent episode, you were talking about how after the War of the Ring, both the Durodan and the hobbits got lands where humans were not allowed to enter, and that just got me thinking about how the Shire is quite isolationist in the beginning of the story, and at that point it seems like not a good thing. It seems like ignorance. And the hobbits going out and having the experiences and meeting the elves, that's something that enriches their culture. So I'd like to hear what you think about how are the isolation rules at the end of the story better than this isolationist tendency in the beginning? Because it seems like it is better, right, in the story.
It does, because you're right. At the beginning, we see hobbits rightly as sort of provincial and isolated and almost xenophobic. And James, we were just recording Homeward Bound, where even Barliman is like, well, we don't want those people coming up here, and we don't want them living here. And I mean, it's very xenophobic and very isolationist. And yet, at the end, Aragorn doesn't say, and you shall live with the other races and become, merged with them and your culture. It's not. And now I'm thinking of the Borg. You will adapt to service us. Your culture will become our culture. Yes, that isn't what happens. They are allowed to live, not only allowed to live, but sort of mandated to live in that sort of isolation from others. And yet, it's only that men are forbidden to go in. Hobbits are not forbidden to go out. And one would imagine that after hearing the the tales, maybe not from Frodo, who probably isn't talking a lot about his experiences given the trauma that he's experienced. Hearing from Sam and Merry and Pippin, you would think that maybe some of these hobbits, especially ones of Tookish descent, are maybe looking to experience things now. They don't have to be as much to experience because the elves are all saying, I'm out of here. So that's maybe not a thing. But certainly at the very least, going to Bree and maybe, making adventures a little bit longer than that. What do you think?
I mean, I think you've hit on something really important there, which is the difference between not letting people in, and that isolationism has two parts to it, right?
Right.
In fact, the isolationism at the start is not so much about not letting people in as not caring about what's going on outside.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what changed, right? So the interest in what was going on outside, as you say, and that especially those of Tookish descent, but I think potentially even more.
Oh, yeah.
After the War of the Ring, that interest in finding out more about what's going on out there, which is, I think, the positive shift in terms of the isolationism. On the question of the preventing people going in, now it's kind of interesting, as we discussed in the context of Barlim and Butterbur, there's a dangerous side to that, depending on what the motivation for it is and so on. But I just keep coming back to what you brought up, Alan. It's that the interest in going out that's shifted more than anything else, that they see themselves in a broader context, which is, I think, a good thing. Because it's a sort of, the double-edged sword of globalization, right? It's a sort of wonderful to know about what's going on elsewhere, but at the same time, not losing some of your own local identity as well.
I also can't help but think that the isolationism that they're granted is something that, obviously it's not, Aragorn's not saying no man shall ever enter here. It's that nobody will ever enter here without your leave. Like you have the right to keep these bounds up. Think about what they just went through. It wasn't just that they were isolationists. They've just been invaded by the ruffians and by Saruman's men and by the guys that Lotho brought in. And they are just getting over that. So it's going to take a little time for them to maybe be open to having people come through. But I don't necessarily think that they stay isolationists. They're sort of given that opportunity and that ability to protect themselves through the authority of the king.
Well, that's why I think it's important to distinguish the two senses you brought up at the start of the answer, which is the interest in the outside world on the one hand, and the ability to sort of be self-determining on the other hand. Right? You can have both, right? You can have an interest in the outside world and also, have agency and control, self-determination without external influence. So, yeah.
Interesting. One thing we probably should have done would be actually look at the words themselves. We actually aren't given Aragorn's precise text. Instead, we're given the way the hobbits have written it down. And so we read about there were 15 chieftains before the 16th and last was born, Aragorn II, who became again king of both Gondor and Arnor. Our king we call him, and when he comes north to his house in Annúminas restored and stays for a while by Lake Evendim, then everyone in the Shire is glad. But he does not enter this land and binds himself by the law that he has made that none of the big people shall pass its borders. Okay, so the part where I said without your leave is actually not included in there. But it is the big people. So is that everybody? Is that just men? Is that men and elves? Is that also dwarves? Or dwarves big enough to be big people? I mean, they're the stunted folk, according to the elves, so maybe they're not big people. I don't know.
Great question, though.
Good stuff. Good question, Meta. Thank you. Very interesting. And the limerick was top-notch. I'm not sure if everybody's going to be able to match that, but we hope so. All right. Who is up next?
Okay. Next up, we have Malky.
Malky, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here.
Our pleasure.
This is my first time on Questions After Nightfall, so my apologies to Jordan for all the nervous coughs I'm about to introduce to the recording. I will deviate from my script for a minute and say that Tom has created a bit of a monster. Meta is a very hard act to follow, but I did also write a limerick before she had shared. So here goes.
All right.
The news these days will make you sag and mope. Of course, we turn to Tolkien, that master of the trope, that no matter how glum, day still will come. But did he distinguish the kinds of hope?
Ooh.
So more seriously, my question today is a little bit open-ended.
Yeah.
So I'll ramble for a quick moment and then turn it back to you. So like most of us, I feel that every time I reread Tolkien, something new stands out. And as I've been reading through The Lord of the Rings again during a difficult time these past 6 months, I've been newly struck by the depth and nuance of the idea of hope in Tolkien's work. So, for example, we have Estel hope, defined kind of as opposed to blind hope, or there's Sam's personal hope, planning their return journey or his future garden while in Mordor, versus Hurin's almost cosmic Aure and Tuliva hope that day shall come again, even if he might not have hoped to see it himself. There's even some hope maybe in the more Beowulfian Circle of Light situations, like Theoden's grim hope to make such an end as will be worth a song, if any be left to sing of us hereafter. Obviously, a lot of ground has already been masterfully covered on this topic, so for my part, I hope this isn't too repetitive a discussion. My question is, what distinctions between types of hope in the Legendarium do you see as meaningful distinctions to make, if any? And if you want, which of those types do you find most interesting to read about?
Ooh, that is a good question.
I feel weird talking about it in front of Tom, though. I feel like Tom needs to join, join in this discussion.
Folks, read Tom's book.
Exactly.
That's my answer to that question. Read his book. Yeah, I think that the easiest breakdown, if you will, is certainly the ones that we're given names for, Amdir and Estel. And that's certainly the start. But there are a lot more. I like the distinction, Malky, that you made, with Sam's sort of personal hope, this idea that I'm going to get back and start a garden. The fact that he keeps that box with him at a time when it makes no sense to do so. Not logically, But I also think, I'm thinking back to that moment in Many Partings. I think it was in the very first episode because it was at Theoden's funeral where we learn about the names for Frodo and Sam that Gandalf gave him in one of the drafts, the hope-based names, and how really very precise and really on the nose they really were for each of them, right? Because you had Branwe Athan Harthad, which meant endurance beyond hope, which is Frodo. And it really was, because his endurance took him beyond the point of what he was hopeless. It was done. Yes. He expected to die, as we read. I mean, that's something that Tolkien talks about in a letter. He expected to die doing this. And then we have Sam, which was Harthad Luithiad, hope unquenchable, which describes Sam to a T. Hope unquenchable, the guy who keeps his box with, magic dust and a seed in it while he's on an erupting volcano. That is hope unquenchable.
I think that's actually one of the most interesting dichotomies of hope that one can find, right? In the case of Frodo had something he needed to accomplish. He couldn't see how it was even possible. No. But he knew he didn't have anything else to hold on to. No. Right? Other than the quest. His commitment.
Exactly. I made this promise. This is what I have to do. Determination.
Exactly. Whereas Sam, it's almost the opposite. He couldn't see how the thing could happen, but he still had the hope,
right?
Regardless. And it's interesting because what it made me think of as well, and I can tie this into a question. In Hebrews 11 in the New Testament, we get this line about Abraham believing that God can raise people from the dead. And it's really interesting that it's can raise, not will raise. It's in the context of talking about Isaac and so on. But what's really interesting there is the distinction between not knowing what's going to happen, but having hope because of something else, some belief you have about a person or whatever.
Right.
And so I'm wondering how that ties in too, right? There's difference between, in the case of Sam and Frodo, it's not a person that they're trusting in.
No.
But there's often, when you hear talk about hope, this idea of, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know because of the nature of things or a person or whatever, I know I can still have hope.
Yeah.
I think you see that a lot in the Theoden hope.
Yes. I was about to say that Theoden hope versus the Denethor hopelessness is another big...
Yeah. It's sort of, I don't know what's going to happen, but it almost doesn't matter what's going to happen because of the hope that I have in... Yeah. That, I think, is different, again, from both Frodo and Sam, right? Because I don't think you could say that of either Frodo or Sam. It's not... Sam's not thinking, it doesn't matter what happens.
No. He's definitely not thinking it.
And Frodo's certainly not thinking that.
No. He might think no matter what happens after I accomplish the quest, right? I mean, that's what I have to do. After that, it doesn't matter. And he literally says as much. It doesn't matter, Sam, whether we're out of food, because that's as far as we get. And I can't put any thought into what happens afterwards.
Yeah. It's not only that he can't think beyond that. It's even once that's passed, he can't.
Yeah, he really can't.
Can't get over that. Yeah.
It has emptied him. And I'm both looking forward to and sort of dreading thinking through that over the next couple of chapters in Scouring the Shire and Greyhaven.
Yeah. I mean, we've already seen a lot of that already.
We really have a lot more than I thought in Homeward Bound and many partings.
But then Sam, on the other hand, he's just keeping that hope
unquenchable. Yeah, you can't get rid of it with Sam.
Yeah,
the hope. We talk about Estelle and Amdir all the time, and of course, Aragorn's name being Estelle, and I think this is an oversimplistic interpretation, but I think a lot of people will try to draw the lines between Estelle and faith rather than hope, and Amdir is more what we would traditionally say hope. Like I hope the weather's nice tomorrow.
Yep.
And I do think that comes into play in the context of maybe the idea of eucatastrophe, right? Because you don't know that it won't happen, you know that it can happen. And therefore you should never give up hope because like Gandalf says at the Council of Elrond, hope is for those who see despair is for those who see the end beyond all doubt. And yet how can we who are finite beings living in a single moment in time sequentially see the end, which is in the future by definition, beyond all doubt.
Yeah.
Therefore, we have to have at least some hope that there will be something that intervenes, some force, some person, some entity, some circumstance that enables us to complete the task, whether the task is to destroy the ring or whether the task is to defend the city of Minas Tirith.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know that I can quantify the exact numbers or types of hope, but I can say it's certainly a lot more three-dimensional than simply Amdir and Estelle. I mean, it's so multi-layered. And it is so very individual. As you point out, the hope of Theoden is so radically different from the hope of Sam, which is in turn radically different from the hope of Frodo, and different from even the hope of Aragorn. I mean, Aragorn doesn't see how this thing can happen. How, if I'm Aragorn, I'm looking at a virtually impossible task, half of which I have zero control over, which is I can only become the king of the unified realms of Arnor and Gondor if Frodo succeeds in this quest.
Right.
And yet I still also have my own part to do that is nigh unto impossible. It's such a rich theme.
It is.
I mean, again, hope. It's like one of those things where, all right, hope in Tolkien, go. And you're like, okay, we'll see you next season. I mean, you could go on. And certainly books have been written and will be continue to be written on the idea of hope in Tolkien. And I think that is one of those things that keeps so many people coming back because no matter what's going on, not only do you learn new things every time you read Tolkien, you experience hope. You experience these things oftentimes very, very personally, very, firsthand as a result of it. So great question, Malky. Thank you. James, who do we have up next?
Next up, we have Anthony from Texas.
Anthony, welcome.
I don't play in the really deep pond that Tom seems to control with brilliance that I have never seen, and Sam's in there, everybody else is in there, so I have a simple. I have been frustrated with orc procreation in this world.
That's an even harder question.
So I have tried this out from several different directions of thought, and none of them work. From the days of Rampithecus on our planet, there has to be a caring entity caring for offspring who grow. Unless you say that you can spawn them in some mechanized world, some dystopian universe like The Giver, and you have some systematic controls in place that would like spawn children and then that would care for the children. But that doesn't exist in Tolkien's world either. And also in a world of finite resources, which even Middle-earth has to be, you have to view things as there can't be an endless supply of enemies. You just can't sui generate millions of enemies to run over people like bacteria. And then you get to literally one of my favorite episodes that you ever did, the brigand talk of, what were we doing? Remember the good times when we didn't have these bad guys? We would just be brigands and cause ruckus and trouble.
We could just go set up camp someplace. And,
exactly. Good old days. And you're like, when were those days? So that was one of my favorite episodes. So if you coordinate all of that, how is it possible for these weapons of war, or even just bad people grumbling, how can you make them? What societal do they come from? How does this math work? I haven't figured it out yet because, like, again, resources will dictate the number of enemies your enemy can have. I mean,
that's true. No, that's true. They've got to eat. You're right.
You've given them all the limitations. They're not magic. What happens? How does this work?
All right. Good question.
I think there's something Tolkien's really struggled with working out.
Oh, for the entirety
and
of
never
his time
solved.
working it out.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. Yeah, clearly orcs are not a magical force. They are not, pop, I need another legion of orcs, so I'm just going to snap my fingers and generate them out of nothing.
Well, out of nothing, no. But I mean, okay, so where do we draw the line there on the saying, they're not magic?
They reproduce as normal beings, right? So there's a gestation period and there's,
Yeah, I just don't know whether we can. I mean, if you look at all sort of Melkor's quote-unquote sub-creations, none of them play by the rules. Why would orcs?
No. But orcs already by the time of the Lord of the Rings, the orcs were already in existence. They'd already been created. We could certainly talk about sort of the magical aspect of their conversion from whatever they were, whether it's elves or men or, whatever it may be. But
it's challenging because obviously, I mean, we get mention of, crossbreeding.
Yeah.
We get half orcs.
Yeah.
What on earth's going on with half orcs?
Yeah. We also get the different breeds of regular orcs. When we're in Mordor, we get the small tracker orcs, and then we get the big warrior orcs. We eventually see improved, orc version 1.2 beta testing. They can go out in the daylight and they can run farther and have more endurance. I mean, clearly they are still enhancing the race of orcs, right? I mean, Sauron is still manipulating the bloodlines, and I'm sure it's a terrible eugenics program. And yet they still have to reproduce. And like Anthony said, there has to be some sort of system to raise the young. They're not born as warriors. They're born as children. So how do you generate the numbers necessary for war?
As I said, I don't think Tolkien knew the answer. So I don't think we're going to come up with something.
So then how does Sauron build a force? I mean, he'd have to foresee far enough in advance to grow generations of these orcs. They're going to be born as children. We don't know whether the gestation period is any different, and we don't know what he's doing to actually, generate these numbers. But those orcs are going to have to grow from childhood to at least young adulthood and be of fighting age.
Do we know anything at all about their lifespan?
Don't know that we do. I mean, we know they're mortal.
Right. But when Sauron comes back to Mordor and starts building Barad-dûr and stuff like that, to what extent can he just gather existing orcs that may live for hundreds of years until they die?
Maybe. I mean, do they live that long?
One might imagine they would actually have fairly short
Yeah,
lives.
I mean, they're cannon fodder. So for the most part, they have short lives, but they have short lives because they die violent deaths, not because...
Elves in the same situation would have short lives.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, this is such a tough one. And I hate punting on it, but it's like you said, Tolkien tried to work on this for ever and just never came up with a satisfactory answer in terms of either the origin, elves, because then you deal with the issue of the serial longevity of the soul and what happens to the Fëanor of orcs.
And agency and whether they can be...
Exactly. I think you have to end up coming back to them being men, corrupted men. Then what? Then are we talking about, how much change takes place in the lifespan?
Yeah.
I don't think I have an answer for this one, James.
I don't. I certainly don't.
I'm sorry, Anthony. It's a great question. And it does make you think because you're right. I mean, Tolkien very much uses orcs as cannon fodder in the books. I mean, that's the role they serve. And we only get glimpses and hints of any sort of orc culture, in terms of like their art, which is just the graffiti and things like that. There's very little to be said for orcs developing anything other than new means to violence. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And we just don't know. We don't know, like you said, James, what if there are a bunch of orcs some other place just living ordinary civilian lives and they're drafted into service, 5 years before the War of the Ring. But yeah, it really does, as Katie says in the chat, give you an appreciation for the struggle that Tolkien had in dealing with this. I mean, here we are just stumbling and fumbling our way through this question because there isn't an answer. And Tolkien put a lot more thought into it than we could, even if we took the whole episode to talk about this.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. So, fourth and forever, we're punting. For those of you who don't understand American football references, that means we're kicking the ball to the other team. and letting them have a turn. So, James, who's next?
Next, and last but not least, Katie.
Event and Patreon community coordinator. Welcome,
and
Katie.
So much more.
Of course.
Thank you, guys. I had kind of a speculative question for you guys. As readers, we often have the benefit in stories, and certainly the Legendarium is no exception, in which we are able to view the events and characters of that story from either a 30,000-foot view of the whole story, or from the perspective of certain characters or certain groups of characters, and where we are able to see the whole of the things. And because of this, as readers, we often have quite strong reactions to certain characters, either in a positive or a negative way. And yet sometimes it is quite different to the reactions of other surrounding characters on the ground level of being within the text. I'm thinking of Turin and Thingol, where readers quite often have strong opinions, reactions to Turin, and yet Thingol, despite Turin's actions, and frankly, despite Thingol being quite the haughty snob sometimes, Thingol shows him grace and kindness and favor. Other than Turin and Feanor, who I'm deliberately saying you can't go with, what other characters in the Legendarium come to mind for you where the reactions characters have to them can be quite different from the one a reader might have?
Okay. Wow. So reader response or reaction to a character versus the character's response to a given character. Okay. Feanor's sons probably had a very different view of their father than I do. I mean, there's a start. I like that. And it is a shame that I can't go to the Turin answer, because that is one that comes to mind right away. Though I wonder, in fairness, there are a lot of characters that interact with Turin that have compassion maybe than some readers might have. Belig comes to mind. In terms of just a willingness to a long-suffering endurance, But let me think of some other characters. What about a bad guy? Let's talk about somebody like a Miglin. We who've read the story look at Miglin from the very beginning as, we know where he's headed, and he is just a piece of work. But he does still have family, that view him differently, at least until the end. That would certainly be one example.
It's such a rich question that I almost need a lot of time to think about. Another one that came to mind, or a pair that came to mind, is Aldarion and Arendis.
Oh, yes. Aldarion and Arendis is a really good example. I'm going through that right now in today's Tolkien Times.
Yeah, because in both cases, you've got... that in itself is so rich in terms of...
Oh, yeah. Nobody gets out of that story unscathed.
No. And it always raises this question as well from a reader response point of view. What does your... And I asked this in class because we taught... In the class that I taught with Elise on the second age, we taught this story. And one of the questions I asked the class was, does your opinion of Aldarion change once you read the letter from Gil-galad?
Oh, man. Yeah.
Does that justify any of the actions or not? Right. So that's a really interesting case. Unusual for Tolkien, where you find out something after the fact about what the motives of somebody was.
Yeah.
So, that Aldarion was the first person that came to mind, but Arendis is almost equally so.
Yeah.
You get a very different sense. Another thing, this isn't quite the question you're asking, Katie, but another thing I just want to bring up, because it just popped into my head, was the different perspective you get in, say, reading the Tale of Years compared to other sources of the events. Because you get this it's really weird what gets chosen to be put in the Tale of Years. The way that certain events get described, things that get included, things that don't get included. So it's not quite the same in terms of reaction to characters, but certainly reaction to what events are important. You just sort of get a sense in reading the Tale of Years of a particular bias, which is always interesting for me. I always like sort of thinking about whose point of view is this being told from. The whole Second Age thing is like that, right? The difference between the Akalabeth on the one hand and the downfall of Numenor, not the text by Tolkien, tell a completely different version of the same events that are kind of doing that same sort of thing of giving a different perspective about the character's motivations. Isildur would be another interesting one.
Most assuredly, yeah. I'm thinking a relatively obvious one, Frodo. The way Sam views Frodo can never be challenged, right? I mean, Frodo is flawless. 100% all of the time flawless.
Yep.
And it borders on hero worship. And those of us who read the story do see Frodo's flaws, and Frodo is, make no mistake, incredibly brave, heroic, all of those good things.
Enduring.
Yes, exactly. Endurance beyond hope. But, he is still as imperfect as anyone else. And yet Sam views Frodo in a light that none of us could possibly duplicate. Find somebody who views you the way Sam views Frodo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm thinking, I'm just chewing through some other options.
Yeah. No, Frodo's a great one.
How about Denethor and Faramir? Denethor has such a low view of Faramir that I can't understand. I mean, it literally doesn't make any sense. I mean, I understand it from the perspective of a psychologist or something, right? I mean, you were so enamored of Boromir that nobody could ever compare to him, and therefore Faramir is, weak.
Boromir, for that matter. Boromir is another person.
Yeah, that's true. 100% that's true. But Denethor's view of Faramir is so skewed that how Denethor views him versus how we all view him. I mean, he's, as everybody knows, my favorite character in The Lord of the Rings. So, yeah, Denethor's just wrong. But it's easy to say that. But it is interesting to sort of as a thought exercise to look at these characters and see how not only do we view them, but how did the characters contemporary to them see them. Interesting stuff. Good question, though, Katie. I like it. It makes you think. And there are, as James, was pointing out, dozens of examples. It would be the kind of thing where you could really think through a lot and really come up with some interesting examples. I definitely liked your Eldarion and Arendis one, James. That's a big one. And for those of you who have never read that tale in Unfinished Tales, it is absolutely worth the read. The most human of human dramas that Tolkien wrote, in my opinion. It shows such insight into flawed people, into just ordinary flawed people. There are no Aragorns in that story. There are no Gandalfs in that story. It's sad all around, but it's really, really well done. Yeah. And don't forget, folks, as Katie pointed out in the chat, my previous co-host, Dr. Sarah Brown, actually won the Tolkien Society Award this year for Best Paper on Eldarion and Arendis. So be sure to read that. All right, James. Well, we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of a second round. I don't think we have time for everybody to ask a second question. So, Meta, what do you have for us?
Okay, I don't have a verse for this. It'll have to be like, prose poetry or whatever you call it. It's about the end of the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth. I was reading The Tale of Years in the Appendix B, where it says, Third Age came to its end in the War of the Ring, but the Fourth Age was not held to have begun until Master Elrond departed, and the time was come for the dominion of men and the decline of all other speaking peoples in Middle-earth. And when you go into the specific dates, you can see there are actually some different times that the Fourth Age is considered to have started, depending on whether you're in Gondor or the Shire. But there's at least a 2-year gap between the time the ring is thrown into the fire and the beginning of the Fourth Age. Right. So I'm just wondering why there is this gap that is neither the Third Age nor the Fourth Age. And also, why is it when Master Elrond departs that the Fourth Age ends? Yeah,
why isn't it Galadriel or Gandalf or something? That's
exactly.
Even though all three leave on the same boat.
Yeah, and there are still elves left in Middle-earth, right? So it's not like it's the last elves.
No. Círdan hangs around because Círdan does.
He's going to take the last ship. That's his
Celeborn.
Role. Yeah.
So what are these 2 years about, and why Elrond? And does this all say anything about how these ages of the world work in Tolkien's writings? What do you think?
So the first thing is that periodization, which is this task of splitting up the timeline into different ages, is in the primary world a really difficult thing to do. And it's actually, I think, unusual, the situation that we have in Middle-earth, where we have a clear, this is when the first age ends and when the second age starts, right? I don't know if also that's retrospective to a certain extent, but obviously, we have the War of Wrath, we have Elrond and Elros making their decision. You got the sort of, and the founding of Numenor and all that kind of stuff. We've got those sort of firm points that do this. In the real world, it's impossible to say, when did we go from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance? When did we go from this period?
You can only do that with the benefit of hindsight.
Or unless you go by kings and queens, right? You can say the Victorian era or the Edwardian era.
Well, that's true. If the era is named for the person, then it ends when the person ends. Yeah.
So I actually kind of like that there's a little bit of tension in third to the fourth age transition, because I think that there's a realism to that we otherwise don't get. But on the question of what's marking the end of the third age, I think this is really, really interesting. And it comes back to what I was saying in response to Katie's question about different points of view. It's really interesting looking at the Tale of Years about what they care about. Mm-hmm. Before I get to the actual end of the third age, I want to point out one of the really amazing things about the annals in the Tale of Years is that the big event for them on March 25th, 3019, is not the destruction of the One Ring, nor even Sauron's passing. It's the downfall of Barad-dûr. And that in itself is really interesting, right? If you were to say, what was the big event that happened on March 25th? I think most people would say probably the destruction of the One Ring's the biggest thing. Sauron going away. The downfall of Barad-dûr is sort of the seems like a third on the list, right?
Yeah.
But that's the thing that's given as the significant event that happened on that day. I think because from the point of view of a Gondorian, they don't know about the One Ring. No. And they don't even necessarily have that much engagement with Sauron as a single figure. For them, it's Barad-dûr and everything that's emerging from there that they care about. And so that's what changed for a Gondorian, is that Barad-dûr as a whole went down. But of course, that's not the end of things. It's the parting of the three rings, I'm going to suggest.
Yeah.
Which may seem surprising, but it's when the three rings go that I think we get the last... I mean, that's in effect the last part of the ring story, right?
Yeah.
Is once those three rings go, and that marks not only the end of the rings of power, but also all of the stuff that enabled the elves to do and stuff. So in a way, the departure of the three rings really does mark the end of the time of the elves and the time for...
And yet those rings no longer had any power after March 25th, 3019.
They didn't. But I think I don't know whether it was just symbolic, but the departure of them from, because it's made explicit in one of the accounts that it's the three rings depart and they're marking the end of the third age.
I think you're right. It's also who's wielding them, right? Because when Galadriel and Elrond and Gandalf leave, Middle-earth, just those three leaving is the end of an age. It has to be. You've got the leaders of the free world saying, okay, you're on your own now. And that is the mark of the beginning of the fourth age, the end of the third.
Well, it's not the beginning of the fourth age yet, and that comes to the sort of why is there 2 years? Again, I think the beginning of the fourth age is that more realistic periodization thing, and it's also just in terms of choosing a national celebration.
Yeah.
Right. So,
what's going to be your holiday? Yeah.
What's going to be your national day? Right. So it's an interesting question. Obviously Americans have the 4th of July. In Australia, this is a big open question at the moment, because the day that Australia celebrates as its national day is not the day it became independent, because it became independent on the 1st of January, 1901. So we already have New Year's Day. It's kind of, and it was just such a, it was non-violent. It was just literally a handing over kind of thing. It's not, that's not what gets celebrated. What does get celebrated, unfortunately, is the date of the settlement, the colonization, effectively sort of almost Columbus Day. Imagine if instead of 4th of July, you celebrated Columbus Day, right?
Yeah, that would be a little controversial. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, but it's the same sort of thing in Gondor, right? What's Gondor going to choose as the day? And they happen to choose Barad-dûr as the date because that's what they wanted to celebrate. In a way, it's almost kind of an independence for them, right? But they could have picked there's other potential dates they could have picked, but they chose that.
True. The periodization is hard to do. And I think the fact is we're reading something that is virtually contemporaneous with that. So it makes sense that we're seeing a little bit of muddied waters in that regard, while simultaneously still seeing a very clear delineation between first and second and third ages. Because for the documenters, for the people writing it down in the book that we are reading when we read The Lord of the Rings, that transition from the first to second age is, of course, very clear. That's been in their history books for millennia. The transition from the third to the fourth age is virtually contemporaneous and much, much harder to identify, and will be, as you suggested, different for the different cultures. The Shire is going to observe a different day than Gondor. And I think that explains why there's a gap. It explains why it's not exactly clear. And it's another example of Tolkien doing a really good job of bringing real history into a constructed world in order to make it feel that much more real. James, you're looking something up, aren't you?
Yeah, I was just looking, because in the introductory paragraphs, which Meta cited, that's where it says the Third Age came to its end in the War of the Ring, but the Fourth Age was not held to have begun until Master Elrond departed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if in the conceit of the sort of who wrote this down, that was written by somebody different than actually did the timeline. Because in the timeline itself, there's that sort of introductory part that actually talks about what events separated.
Yeah, that has it in actual prose paragraphs as opposed to just the numerical list.
Whereas, of course, we get in the actual Tale of Years, we get that Frodo is again ill that happens. I'm just looking, because there it says, on this day, the Fourth Age began in the reckoning of Gondor in March 25th, 3021, which is actually prior to the departure. So there's actually overlap there, right?
Yeah.
So the Gondorians started celebrating the beginning of the Fourth Age, not 6 months before the Greyhavens.
Yeah.
So in the sort of dated parts, right, it's September 29th that's marked the end of the Third Age, but it's earlier, March 25th, that's marked as, on this day, the Fourth Age began in the reckoning of Gondor.
The reckoning of Gondor, right.
Yeah.
And because that was, of course, going to be their New Year's Day now. March 25th,
and it becomes their New Year's Day. Yeah.
Which Aragorn had explained at the Field of Cormallen, saying that, it's whatever day they woke up. Oh, it's April, whatever. But, here, the New Year is always going to be reckoned as beginning on March 25th. Yeah.
So that happens before, right? The sequence is they decide that March 25th is going to be New Year's.
Yeah. But they don't start the Fourth Age right away.
They don't start the Fourth Age until 2 years later.
Yeah.
And then they end the Third Age 6 months after that.
That's not confusing at all. Not at all.
Yeah, exactly. Although the prose at the start suggests that the end of the War of the Ring marked the end of the Third Age.
Right.
That's not, so...
And who knows what it would be for a Middle-earth historian writing in the Fifth Age.
Well, you would have articles on the problematic periodization of Middle-earth.
Right, exactly. Historians would be making the determination.
Yes.
What would that determination look like? In the Fifth Age, looking back to the transition from Third to Fourth, they would say, it happened on this day.
Well, it's like a good friend of mine from my undergraduate days said that the 1960s started in 1956 and ended in 1968.
Yeah.
Right? So the 60s as a period
60s,
doesn't necessarily correspond to the actual...
to years of the calendar, right. And I would even say the same thing about the 80s, being a child of the 80s myself. You don't say that the 80s began on January 1st, 1980. That felt very much like the 70s still. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting stuff. Good question. Katie, I believe you were up next. What do you have for us?
Yes. So a second one, kind of a similar kind of question. We just had the absolutely brilliant and poignant discussion on Eowyn's healing with Alan and Sarah in episode, I believe, 321, looking at not just Eowyn's healing from the battle, not just from her encounter with the Witch King, but healing her trauma in large part through the openness and holistic acceptance and unconditional love from Faramir. It has situated itself deeply within my being as my favorite moment of healing within the Legendarium. And I was curious as to what each of yours was. Which moment of healing in the Legendarium resounds most with you and why?
Favorite moment of healing?
My favorite moment would be the same as yours, Kate. It would have to be Eowyn.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to say that because Eowyn is Eowyn, and because I love Faramir so much and his role in that. But if I have to pick a different answer, I mean, some of them happen off stage, so to speak, right? I mean, Frodo does eventually get dragged unconscious into the last homely house, and he is healed, but we don't see it happen. All right, I'm going to go out on a limb here. It's another one we don't see on stage, but we know happens. Frodo's healing in the Undying Lands.
Mm-hmm. Well, I kept thinking of Frodo because it's maybe because of what we've been reading lately in the last few episodes, Alan, but I've really been thinking a lot about not so much Frodo's healing, but Frodo's lack thereof. And I'm glad you brought up that eventual healing.
Given all he's gone through for so long and endured for so long and then suffered, for a couple of years after, to know that he was able to sail to Toloresea and to be healed. I mean, again, we don't know anything about it. We don't know what the details are. We don't know if Bilbo is still alive. I don't believe he was. We don't know if he even lived long enough for Sam to make it over.
Right.
I don't think he did. I mean, nobody wants to say that out loud, but I don't think Frodo was reunited with Bilbo, and I don't think Sam was reunited with Frodo. But Frodo is healed.
I'm happy to accept Bilbo, but you got to let me believe that Sam got to see Frodo.
I want it, believe me.
The thought of Sam
making it there and finding out Frodo's
finally
gone.
Going and then Frodo not being there. No,
I know. I don't want it to be true. Just because I don't want it to be true doesn't mean it isn't.
The other healing I want to bring up is the Shire.
Oh, the Shire itself. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, wow, the truly the elven magic that takes place in 1420.
Yes.
The party tree, as a Malorn, and seeing the entire place just bloom like 10 years worth of growth in one spring.
And how great that would have been for Sam.
Oh, Sam would have just been, yeah. I mean, this is glorious. And all the kids that were born that year, and the beer,
half of them Sam's, no.
Half of them, just about. Seriously.
Well, not that year, but
Well, yeah, no, it's true.
Sam and Rosie broke some records, but
I think they did, and Sam rested, weary and content. The healing of the Shire, I like that. That's good. Personal healings. I think the other one that I would come to probably is my second behind Frodo. Would be Theoden's, even though it was his death that finished that healing for him, to restore him from where he was when the three hunters and Gandalf showed up at the Golden Hall to the moment on the Pelennor fields is such a glorious arc. And to see him healed even as he faced his death is one of my favorite moments in the whole story. Man. Yeah. Lots of them. You could even add Boromir. Certainly my favorite repentance arc.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's healing in a way, sort of heart healing for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of, there's just so many, but yeah, those are my favorites would be Frodo in Tolaresia and Theoden. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful question though. I think we still have time for a couple of more questions. James, do you happen to remember who was up next?
Anthony was next, I believe.
All right. Anthony, fire away.
The last publicized episode was about readings in Rohan, celebration, funeral. Did you find the irony between the complaints about the wizened kings of Gondor reading statements of the kings and the records in the past, where all the focus was given to the past, where aged kings sat in hollow rooms and did all that stuff, and then literally we sailed right into it in the last episode, and I couldn't tell whether that was Tolkien trying to link to Norse and Celtic and English Anglo-Saxon tradition, but I can't imagine that he forgot the obvious. Geez, guys, we just got rid of that. That was the problem over in Gondor. Why are we doing that here? I mean, and so I didn't know what your thought was about that, because it seemed disquietingly familiar in a way that I wasn't happy about. We all love the people in Rowan, but if I don't like them adopting these things that clearly led you down a road that didn't work. So that was the question, if you had a thought about it, or I'm just overreading it.
No, that's certainly a good question, and it makes me want to go back to that moment in the window on the west when Faramir says those things, right? And let's go back and look at that text, because I think it's important. He's talking about it in the context of how Numenor became so obsessed with death and with trying to achieve immortality, right? No, they didn't get into the black arts, right? The evil art, it's not said that evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One is ever named in honor there. Yet even so, it was Gondor that brought about its own decay. So talking about as a descendant of Numenor, falling by degrees into dotage and thinking that the enemy was asleep, who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Númenóreans still, as they had in their old kingdom and so lost it, hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their descent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls musing on heraldry. In secret chambers, withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high cold towers asked questions of the stars. I don't think that it is that there's one element in there that's bad. It's that when all of them are taken as a whole, you see a culture that has become obsessed with death and obsessed with trying to achieve longer and longer and longer life. And I don't think we see that in this moment with the burial or with the funeral of Theoden. Even though we're reciting the kings of Rohan, we're not considering that those names are more dear than the names of their sons. And we're not focusing on the past so much as we're then transitioning, like, here's our history, and now Éomer, long live Éomer, right? And I feel like it's a little different. What do you think, James?
I think I agree with everything you said. I would add as well that what they're celebrating about the people is different as well. Like this, you can't imagine the Rohirrim trying to live long lives. They want to live, like they want to die well.
That's right? That is right.
And I think that's a big difference, right? That you get the sense that the celebration amongst the Rohirrim is about the life lived and the death died and so on, which is not at all what's going on with the Gondorians, right? They don't seem to be celebrating at all the great, glorious death. They're just focused on this extending their lives. And there's sort of this hollowness to that, I think. There's no sense at all, I don't, in what you just read with the Gondorians of about it being about the great deeds of the kings or anything like that. It just seemed to be almost remembering them for their own sake and losing focus on what was important because of that. So I think it's a very different kind of memorial to the past. And as you said, Alan, there's no indication in the Rohan case that they were neglecting emphasis on the young because of this focus on the past.
I think that's the pretty big distinction. And also the purpose of celebrating somebody who, has just died, celebrating their history, as opposed to obsessing about the past and using that as sort of like fuel to drive this aim towards immortality. Yeah. Good question, though. All right, James, I think we have time for one more, and that's it. Who's going to be batting cleanup tonight?
Well, it's actually Tom. Tom is next on the list.
Oh, no. All right, we're all done, folks. Out of time. Just kidding. Fire away, sir.
This is a quick one. Okay, it starts with a limerick.
Because, of course, it does.
There once was a villain called Gothmog who started out being a Balrog. But that's not the same guy who worked for the Eye and served as the Witch King's top dog.
I love it. That's brilliant stuff. All right.
And the question is actually about that Gothmog in the Return of the King. Okay, it's a two-part question.
All right.
Man or something else?
Mm-hmm.
And if man, a Nazgul or not?
Okay. Good question. I remember we chatted about this and couldn't come up with a fixed answer when we encountered him on the Pelennor Fields back in the day. We know that he's the one who, of course, ordered the reserves, into battle and to move into the Pelennor Fields to attack the cavalry. We don't know for sure what he is. There's zero evidence as to what he is. I believe that he's not a Nazgul because there's no description of the sort of fear and terror that goes before the Nazgul in relation to Gothmog. But I do think he's a man. I believe he's probably. I tend to think of him as like a black Numenorian, like the Mouth of Sauron. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. That's where I see, because clearly men are going to be smarter than the orcs. So I believe that Tolkien would put men in positions of leadership and power where that made sense. And he was also second in command of the Witch King. The Witch King's not going to put an orc in his second in command. He's going to put a man in his second to me, in my eye. Could he be something else? Yes, he could be. Oh, I'm trying to remember the word. James, there was the Bulldog. Thank you. That's the one. Bulldog. Right. This idea of a Maya spirit, a fallen Maya in orc form. Right. A niche little concept that we don't read about in a lot of other places, but the idea is certainly there that some of the orcs early on might have been these bulldogs, these Maiar spirits. So I don't know. What do you think, James?
My leaning, if I had to, if I were a betting man, I would probably go with a black Numenorian.
Okay, I feel good if you agree with me.
No. I don't think he's a Nazgul. I think it makes more sense to me that you kind of have this leveling down in the chain of being as you go down each rank sort of thing. So him being a black Numenorian makes most sense to me. The problem with him being Like some people have speculated he's just a really powerful orc or something. He's got a Sindarin name though, so
yeah.
I think that rules out that level of stuff.
I agree.
I'm inclined to think a Black Numenorian, or I mean maybe a later. Do we have any sense of when he came into the service of?
We don't.
I don't think so. So it could be a later corrupted Gondorian.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's an orc as portrayed in the Peter Jackson films.
I think the name alone prevents that. And then I think the fact that they were not given the description of his impact on the battlefield being Nazgul-like, I think eliminates the idea of him being a Nazgul.
So I would be inclined to say either a Black Numenorian or a later corrupted, but probably quite high-ranking Gondorian.
Because the Black Numenorians, I mean, they're Numenorians, so they're still going to have an extended lifespan. And I think we talked about the age of the Mouth of Sauron. I don't remember what we landed on, but I wanted to say something like in his 80s by the time that we have that moment, at the gate. So, yeah, I could buy that. Yeah, Black Numenorian or corrupted Gondorian, corrupted man of some kind. That'd be my answer as well.
But I would guess Gondorian, like somebody that's been taken from Osgiliath or something.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe, from Osgiliath.
The dating's weird, and I don't know how long life preservation.
He'd have to be of relatively pure blood, I would imagine, relatively pure Numenorian blood.
Yeah,
in order to have an extended lifespan.
No, but I'm wondering what.
Oh, you mean
Sauron
if
could have done to help with that?
Could have
thinned him. Part of the job, perks of the job. I don't.
Yeah. He gets to wear the ring every other Thursday. The Witch King's ring. He is the second in command. No, probably not.
I don't know.
We're just going to begin the enwrathening. Yeah.
Well, just to give a little poke of the Morgul blade.
Oh, yeah.
To begin the enwrathification,
the enwrathening process, right?
It's like acupuncture, but with Morgul needles.
Ooh, that's an awful thought. Have a whole bunch of little shards of metal working their way up to
2 times a week. It'll do the trick.
Yeah, that will certainly. Yeah, time for your treatment. All right. Well, on that charming note, folks, it wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. But join us again next week when the Lord of the Mark returns for an extended run through the Scouring of the Shire and our special 333rd episode. In the meantime, James, thank you. It has been such a joy and a pleasure to work with you again, and I'm looking forward to having you back, probably with those appendices on the languages and on the calendars and all that fun stuff. But thank you for joining me on this run. I appreciate it.
It's been wonderful. Thanks very much for having me, Alan. And thank you, everyone. Folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Rennells, Barliman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, graphic artist Megan Collins, and website guru Phil Dean.
And speaking of the website, please be sure to take a minute to check out theprancingponypodcast.com. That's where you're going to find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and our online storefront where you can get PPP merch, including chapter-specific artwork from Megan.
Please take a moment to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony Podcast has always been about the books, so if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link to it in our library. We get a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed, we do. And we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. I'll start with Demay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Zaksu in Illinois, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, and Keith in Alabama.
There's also Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Anne in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, John in Japan, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, another Paul in Colorado, and Julie in Washington. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you very much.
Now make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your clarifications, refutations, and argumentations about any of our answers tonight to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. And if you want your voice literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Barliman, though. Even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able.
Indeed. As always, though, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
keep up your merry hearts and ride to meet your fortune.